Safety Study Committee, Chairman Ballinger, Chairman Benton, Chairman Clark, Chairman Dempsey, Chairman Lumpston, Chairman Nix, Representative Brian Prince, Representative Stovall. Yeah, we met a lot, heard a lot of testimony, and this bill is a result of it. This bill is from Senator Albers in the Senate. And I'm going to take a minute and go through it because I think it's something we can all be proud of and you need to know about. Because I think when you go home, you need to be able to tell people what we've done, and we'll make sure you get a summary of it. In Section 2, it starts off pretty quick. It's going to talk about site threat assessments. It's the evaluation of the site. It's going to make sure they do it. It describes it very clearly. It tells who's going to inspect that site threat assessment that they do. They can use a public or a private person. We have GMA working on training the right folks to do this. That has to be done by January 2021, and they shall have a site assessment done by one of these qualified people. And then that site assessment is going to be used in the completion of a school safety plan. If you look on line 60, the plans will go to the Georgia DOE for approval and to the local law enforcement in the community. 64, the plans are going to include 8 things. Currently they include 5. We're adding 3 more, that are dealing with school security issues with weapons, school functions held during non-instructional time, and also transportation issues. They've got to look at those 3 additional things. And 87, where schools can apply for grants to do this, which is a good thing. Also, if you look on 117, every school is going to have a drill related to potential mass casualty incident. You're going to have the drill, but we were very careful and listen to the folks that deal with young people and psychological issues, that we're going to make sure that kids don't have to be in the building, which I think is very important, like they would for a fire drill. On 122, since the plans are not in the view of public, I need to reemphasize, these plans are going to be done behind closed doors. We thought it was very reasonable that they'd have to report how much they spent on them, what they were doing on the projects on school safety. I thought that was very important. And number 128, we'll keep it behind closed doors. 132, the principal shall act as a school safety coordinator. And if you've been in a school, they do that now. The principal has great authority and power, but also immense responsibility. And that section just defines that and clarifies that for them. One thing we really want to do with this, and we found out during all the study committees on both the Senate and House, is that we want to make sure there was good communication. You see that on line 446, 151, we're talking about communication that goes back and forth, and we keep doing that. We talk about GSACs, which is our fusion center that works within the communities to make sure, looking all across the internet and throughout the United States on threats that might pop up in our school systems, and you'd be surprised, and you might ask a GBI agent one time the threats that are caught and are started and do come back to our schools. 164, you look at CSend app. Many of you have never heard of it, which is very unfortunate, but the CSend app is something that's very easy to get on your phone. We'd like for all kids to know about it. What this bill does is it makes it anonymous. We've seen that a lot of people who would report seeing something or even taking a video or a picture of a threatening incident or possibility don't do it because they have to tell who they are. This anonymity is what GBI thinks would make this more effective. There are signs to be put up in the schools. The rest of the bill talks about GBI, the sections, all the rest of them, and about making sure that the GBI can work within this. It's not in their work requirement now or in the code that they have to do, but the rest of the bill addresses that. One thing when we look at this bill, and we all think we need to take great pride in, is what we have done here and what Governor Kemp has done. You look at the $69 million put in the APEX program for mental health. It's going to address some of that. And the $30,000 per school that we're going to put in school safety. And I look forward to seeing what they do as they spend this money to make their school safer. Mr. Speaker, there is an amendment that goes on line 143 that's on the desk, and at that, I'll be glad to yield for any questions.
Do you yield for questions?
Absolutely.
Chair recognizes Representative Cannon to your left for a question.
Thank you. Do you yield, Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you speak to the training that these school safety coordinators will have to go through? You mentioned that they might already be principals. So does it mean that they don't go through any additional training, or they do?
I think if you looked at the training that principals go under to deal with this, you'll see it's very extensive. I know this summer even both I forget the name of it, Gale Conference is all about school safety. The School Board Association's upcoming meetings about school safety. I think it's something that's on their mind, and they've done a good job making sure that principals out there know what to do.
Thank you. Do you further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
And so then therefore, since you just stated that these school safety coordinators don't have to go through any training, but that they probably are attending and it's on their minds, wouldn't you then agree that the certified school resource officers who do already receive that extensive training would then be better at addressing those safety concerns and report that out?
You could say that, but most of the schools don't have school safety officers. Every one of them has a principal, and the bill says it's the principal or their designee. And if you've been in a school, you know that the principal takes this very seriously, and they're going to make sure their designee is well qualified and is going to do the right job.
Thank you.
No further questions.
Well, members, I hope you take it to heart. Appreciate the amendment and the work that was done in doing that. So, you always learn something. But this is a great bill I think you can go home with, that we're going to help address the safety of Georgia schools. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has yielded the well. We have members that have signed up to speak. I would remind members that the Rules Committee has limited debate to 1 hour. The chair will allocate that 30 minutes to each side. Chair recognizes Representative Lopez Romero to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good evening, colleagues. Today I have to rise in opposition to SB 15. I do want to start off by giving thanks and appreciations to the modifications that have been done on this bill since its in original state. However, a less bad bill is still a bad bill. And despite agreeing 100% behind its intention as it relates to site threat assessments for mass shootings or natural disasters as they relate to the proper preparation for them, that intention can be accomplished without growing the school to prison pipeline. We are putting into statutory law the legalization to criminalize our students instead of our good intention of protecting them from crime and behavior that has led to some of these school shootings. And instead of training our school and staff students to in fact better protect themselves. Teacher groups are still very concerned and uneasy, as was mentioned already, about the lack of training specifically as it relates to threat assessments and properly determining what criminal activity relates to mass shootings. Beyond the fact that there is broad language with lacking definitions that imposes mandates on schools, administration, and staff. Teacher and school administrations would prefer to work to make this a good bill, as I would agree to, and I think all of us here would agree, that we can accomplish the intention of safety concerns without, again, criminalizing our students or creating major liabilities for our schools. And unfortunately, this bill does not accomplish its intended goal and its good goal. In fact, just last term, in 2016, we passed out of the General Assembly, Senate Bill 367, which passed to implement the recommendations of the Georgia Council on Criminal Justice Reform that sought policies to reduce the incarceration rates, and included among those recommendations was reducing the number of students in the prison pipeline. Because study after study shows that once a student is involved in the juvenile system or with law enforcement, they are more likely to eventually be involved in the criminal court system as adults. To be clear, the school to prison pipeline is the funneling of children from public school systems into the juvenile or criminal court system, in part due to zero tolerance policies, application of student suspensions that are disproportionate to students that are affected, and administrative processes that adversely affect children of color, poor children, and children with learning disabilities or learning differences. In fact, several organizations do work with our schools to prevent this specific pipeline. For example, even in my own county, Gwinnett County, we have the Gwinnett Parents Coalition to dismantle the school to prison pipeline, Gwinnett STOP for short, and the Interfaith Children's Movement that work to reduce the number of African American males in special education classes who are at risk of being pushed out of schools and into the juvenile and criminal court systems. Furthermore, I do have legal concerns with this bill, again, as it relates to its very broad and vague language, and therefore it goes against its intended goal of school and student safety. And this is true despite the amendment that we have that, again, might make this bill a little bit less bad, but nonetheless, as I mentioned, still a bad bill, because it continues to mandate that public schools report to law enforcement reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. But even with its amendment, violence as it relates to whether it relates to preventing or minimizing school shootings still is not narrow and concise of enough definition to ensure that we do not create a dragnet of government overreach. For example, violence can be a student kicking a chair over, and that is a very different situation versus a student that might actually threaten themselves, another student, or the school as a whole. Furthermore, there's a lack of definition about what reasonable suspicion is, and in the legal world, the reasonable suspicion is the lowest level of burden that you have and is left to be extremely subjective in interpretation. It also mandates that the Department of Education share information with local agencies in their role in the school safety program. These programs that are, in this instant, relate to GSAC are known as fusion centers. And we have had, actually in 2012, criminal investigation to the majority of the fusion centers that we have as it relates to federal national security and counterterrorism. But these congressional investigations actually found that these fusion centers gather data that is irrelevant, misleading, and actually in times engages in illegal spying and targeting of minorities. It also found that fusion centers are often flawed and unrelated to actual terrorism with outdated and uninformative information. Fusion centers have also were determined to be unable to meaningfully contribute to counterterrorism efforts. In fact, that end up hindering instead of aiding these efforts. And if we cannot trust fusion centers for something as important as our national security, how can we rely on them to safeguard the safety of our students? Based on these deficiencies, I would, and many of the teacher and school groups want to continue working on this bill to ensure that we are actually making this a good bill that truly protects our students and our teachers. And for that reason, I urge you to vote no on SB 15 so that we have an opportunity to continue working on this bill to make it a good bill that protects our students. Mr. Speaker, I will yield the well unless there are questions.
You have no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Wynn to speak to the bill.
Good evening, colleagues. Outside the legislature, I work in Georgia public high schools. And for the last 10 years, I've been inside the classroom with young women nearly every single week. I don't take lightly the safety of my students. I don't take lightly the safety of teachers and personnel. And I certainly don't take lightly my own safety. This is not about opposition to school safety plans or to school security. This is about the overall impact of this bill on students. The question I ask myself is, will this bill prevent an active shooter from taking the lives of their classmates, as we've seen with tragedies like Columbine, Sandy Hooks, or Stoneman Douglas High School? The answer is we simply don't know. So I do want to talk about what we do know. In lines 143 to 145 of the bill, when reasonable suspicion of student criminal activity exists, report such suspicion to any local law enforcement agency having jurisdiction over the geographical area of the school. This specific provision mandates, it is a shall, not a may, schools to report all suspicious criminal activity to law enforcement. On the surface, it appears there's nothing wrong with that. But when we write overly broad legislation, the way in which it can be interpreted results in unintended consequences. What constitutes reasonable suspicion? In some cases, reasonable suspicion looks like this. A 14-year-old student named Ahmed Muhammad builds a clock for his engineering class and is subsequently arrested for a hoax bomb because his school called law enforcement. An African-American student falls asleep in the common area of her dorm room at Yale University, and law enforcement showed up and said to her, "Once we verify that you belong here, we'll be on our way." Two Native American brothers tour a college campus, and a 911 transcript reveals the caller believes their behavior is odd and that they are wearing black clothing. What constitutes criminal activity? Criminal activity looks like this. You could use your older sibling's ID to buy cigarettes or get into a bar. That's possession of a fake ID. You could TP your high school as part of your high school prank and be charged with criminal mischief or trespassing. And a violent criminal behavior could be getting into a physical altercation at school or at a sporting event. That would be battery. If this was your child, your little brother, your little sister, your niece, or your nephew, would you believe that calling law enforcement is the best course of action? Or would you believe these situations are best solved by internal school policies and parental involvement? Mandating schools to call local law enforcement for reasonable suspicion of criminal activity does one thing. It creates a school-to-prison pipeline. It criminalizes students for behavioral problems that cannot and will not be fixed through the involvement of law enforcement. We also know that this will disproportionately impact students of color and students with disabilities. Data from our own Georgia Department of Education shows that Black students are 3.5 times more likely to receive out-of-school suspensions than white students. Students with disabilities are almost twice as likely to receive out-of-school suspensions than students without disabilities. We simply cannot afford to funnel students into law enforcement because we will risk permanently losing them to the criminal justice system. I've spent 10 years working with students, many of whom have been identified as being at risk for dropping out of school. There's one thing that they all share in common, and that's they don't feel worthy. And when students don't feel worthy, they're more likely to engage in risky behavior. They don't need us to call law enforcement. They need access to mental health service. They need smaller classroom sizes. They need after-school programming. They need adults and counselors to intervene and help them get on the right path. And most of all, they need to feel loved and they need to feel valued. I've worked with hundreds of young women whose lives changed when we invested in the right resources for them. And when they made mistakes, we didn't report them to the police. We talked to them and we talked to their parents and we gave them mentorship, guidance, and support. This bill would change that because it would require us to call law enforcement first. It would conflict with all the work we've done to get schools successfully trained in positive behavioral interventions and supports. It would undo the work we have done to address school climate. It is inconsistent with the recommendations of the Senate Study Committee on School Safety. We all want safe schools. We all want to protect the lives of students and teachers, but creating a school-to-prison pipeline will not do this. We would be better served to table this bill and revisit this next session so that we don't end up passing a bill that will hurt our students. There is an amendment on the table that will make this bill better, and I'm in full support of that amendment, but I still must be opposed to Senate Bill 15 as a whole. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well unless there are any questions.
No question. You have a question. Do you yield?
Yes, I yield.
Chair recognizes Chairman Knight to your right for a question.
Does the lady yield?
Yes.
If I heard the lady correctly, you are currently working with high school students?
Yes.
So my question to you is, if you had reasonable suspicion to think that a student was selling drugs at school, what would you do?
If I had reasonable suspicion that a student was selling drugs at school, I would go to the counselor and I would go to the principal first. And based on their school policies, I would respect what they have decided is best within their school system and support what they decided to do next.
Lady, further yield?
Yes.
So wouldn't that be reporting it to police?
I don't believe that's true. We are mandated to report to police when there is suspicion of abuse, or when there's suspicion of students harming other students, or when there's suspicion of suicide. But we are not required to report in that circumstance.
Thank you.
Do you further yield?
I'll yield for one more.
Chair recognizes Representative Chokas to your left for a question.
Does the gentlelady yield?
Oh, I don't. Yes.
Thank you. In response to Chairman Knight's question, where if you had a suspicion about a child selling drugs, what if that was false? Wouldn't it be prudent to inform the police so that we could have due process to protect the innocents?
I believe it would be prudent to go to the school system first, because we do believe that school systems have their own policies, internal policies. It's important to maintain that local control for school systems. I would go to them first, and I would defer to them on what action they wanted to take.
Does the gentlelady further yield?
Yes.
Are the school policy or the people in charge of enforcing that, are they trained in the legal protection of the students?
I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield.
Chair recognizes Representative Jasmine Clark to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, today I rise to express deep concern on SB 15. First of all, I wholeheartedly believe in the intent of this bill to keep our students, our kids safe. I have school-age children. This is very important to me. However, I have major reservations when it comes to the psychological trauma associated with active shooter drills, or mass casualty drills as they're referred to in this bill. While I understand that the drills are absolutely necessary for preparing for an emergency situation, and our children have drills all the time, such as fire drills and tornado drills, it has only been recently that we have begun to administer active shooter drills in schools. I can almost guarantee that the vast majority, if not every single member of this body, has never had to take part in an active shooter drill in school as a child, myself included. Active shooter drills have been prompted in response to a rising number of mass shootings that have occurred in our schools across the country. And that is the problem that I have. Instead of addressing gun violence and mass shootings by enacting common sense laws that will keep guns out of the hands of those that should not have them, we have chosen to address gun violence through the use of psychologically traumatic active shooter drills in our schools. We would rather scare 4- and 5-year-olds, having them hide in dark closets and pray a gunman doesn't shoot them through the door, instead of addressing the fact that some people shouldn't be in possession of a firearm in the first place. And then with news coming out that some school districts, not here in Georgia, but some school districts mimic gunshot sounds by shooting blanks in the hallway, and other school districts think it's okay to shoot teachers with airsoft guns, execution style, I feel like we are moving in a horribly wrong direction. We are moving in a direction that normalizes school shootings, and we are moving in a direction that sends a message that being shot in school is a very real possibility. This is our students' new reality. And we are telling our students that we are okay with this new reality because the adults in the room refuse to even discuss guns, gun violence, or common sense gun reform that could prevent these shootings from happening in the first place. Legislation that codifies active shooter drills without legislation that enacts common sense gun reform is flaccid and inadequate. Our children deserve better from us. It is a great moral injustice that children from elementary to high school have grown up in a world where they are used to school shootings as commonplace. We have to look at ourselves and realize that we have ultimately failed our students if we accept this as a way of life now and only make legislation that affects the symptoms and not the root cause. We have to do better. Thank you. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the Majority Caucus Whip, Representative Kelly, to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The hour's late and the topic is serious, so I do want to spend a couple moments addressing the bill that we have before us. I've heard concerns raised about the school-to-prison pipeline. No one takes that more seriously than this legislature has shown that they have by passing criminal justice reform aimed at keeping our juveniles out of the criminal system, helping them rehabilitate their lives, and hopefully getting them back to being productive members of society. This body has addressed that. Governor Deal led a historic effort that dealt with juvenile criminal justice reform. We worked in a bipartisan manner to accomplish the goals that children who make simple mistakes in their life shouldn't have their entire lives ruined by getting involved in the criminal justice system. That was the right approach. We made a bipartisan effort, and this should be a bipartisan effort. We're talking about making our schools safer for our children and our teachers. This bill accomplishes that in many ways. We've heard us talk about the possibility of working with our law enforcement to do drills and help both law enforcement and school administrators know how to respond should one of the worst tragedies that could ever happen on the face of this earth were to occur. We see a lot of political grandstanding around the Parkland shooting. But what we have an opportunity today is to address one of the main problems that happened with Parkland. The fact that law enforcement did not know how to interact properly with the schools to when the shooting began. If law enforcement had been better prepared, if they'd known how to work with our school administrators, they could have cut down the response time and lives could have been saved. That's what we're looking to do in this bill. This bill makes provisions that allow schools to have the discretion whether to do these drills when students are there or not. I think that's a very reasonable approach. This will still allow administrators to work with our law enforcement officials so that our police officers will know how to respond, where to go, how to stop shooters should a tragedy like this take place. This is a reasonable approach. This shouldn't be a political issue. If we are truly serious about making our schools safer for our children and our educators, then we should be proud to support this measure that goes hand in hand with the $69 million that this legislature has appropriated at the direction of the governor to make our schools safer. Now's not the time for us to grandstand. Now's the time for us to deliver and make our schools safer. There will be an amendment offered, and I just want to speak for a minute, and I want to thank the minority leader for offering the amendment because it does narrow in scope. The minority leader working with Chairman Efstration on limiting the scope of what reasonable suspicion applies to, and that deals with violent criminal activity. We do recognize that there are opportunities where we don't want to get law enforcement involved in our children's lives too early. But when there is a reasonable suspicion of violent criminal activity, we owe that responsibility to our children and our teachers to address it. And we have measures in place through our juvenile justice reforms that will make sure that child is dealt with in the appropriate manner and then rehabilitated back to be a productive member of society. Mr. Speaker, I will urge my colleagues, if we are serious about making our school systems a safer place for our students, to vote yes on Senate Bill 15, and I'll yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. There is an amendment that has gone through the Rules Committee. It is Amendment AM 410466. Is there any, clerk will read the amendment.
AM 410466 by Efstration of the 104th, Setzler of the 35th, Trammell 132nd, and others. Amends the House Committee on Rules substitute to Senate Bill 15, LC 41 2042S, by replacing lines 143 through 145 with the following. When reasonable suspicion of violent criminal activity exists, report such suspicion to any local law enforcement agency having jurisdiction over the geographical area of the school, provided, however, that reasonable suspicion of other criminal activity may also be reported, and
is there any objection to adopting the amendment? Is there objection? The chair hears none, and the amendment is adopted. Is there any objection to withdrawing the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is withdrawn. Is there any objection to adopting the substitute offered by the Committee on Rules as amended? The chair hears none. The Rules Committee substitute is adopted as amended. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. What purpose does Representative Wilson rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it true that this chamber passed the Senate amendment to HB 118 earlier today?
I believe that to be true.
Further parliamentary inquiry?
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true then, Mr. Speaker, that under that bill, which has now passed both chambers, students who use an app similar to the one prescribed in this bill to report a threat of criminal activity that they know to be false would be subjecting themselves to a misdemeanor of high and aggravated nature?
I think that addresses itself to the judgment of each and every member. What purpose does Representative Thomas rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't that true that the speakers that spoke against this bill made it very clear that there's a lot of psychological as well as counseling that needs to be involved, not just law enforcement? Is that not true?
I think I did hear that. Not saying it's true.
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that even though the intent of this bill is to make schools safe and our students safe, that this bill does not exactly get it right, and that what we should do is to vote no on this, because what we do not want to do is to add to the school to prison pipeline, nor do we want to continue to incarcerate people of color at a alarming rate that would be starting in elementary school.
I'm sure the lady believes that to be true. What purpose does Representative Kelly rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr.
State
Speaker.
your inquiry.
Isn't it true that in the budget that this House passed this year, that the $69 million that we included for school safety, that funding will go to school counselors to help deal with the trauma and to help identify situations where children may be prone to violence in our schools? Isn't that true?
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What purpose does Representative Hawley rise?
Parliament inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that with my 5.5 years experience as a criminal warrant officer for the largest county in the state of Georgia, as well as an educator in the Eagles Landing Middle School of Henry County Board of Education, that this bill possibly takes the authority away from a teacher and knowing their student and being the sole person, as well as a school administrator being the person upon which to hear wrongdoings happening, and actually places it in the hands of a school resource officer who may not know the child, as well as the school administrator?
I'm sure the gentleman believes that to be true. What purpose does Representative Cannon rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Thank you. Isn't it true that the money that was put in the budget for school safety is more general and does not go specifically to school counselors?
I don't know that that is accurate, but I'm sure it will address the needs as far as it will go. What purpose does Representative Stovall rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't that true on line 146 of the original bill that the concerns that were raised previously about the social services and mental health is addressed in the bill, where there's a ability for the school system to be able to work with not only law enforcement, but mental health and social service providers regarding the student behavior?
I'm sure the lady believes that to be true. Members for the bill are voting aye. Those opposed are voting no. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of Senate Bill 15. The ayes are 110, the nays are 56. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to Senate Bill 20.
Senate Bill 20 by Senator Redd of the 33rd, Ligon of the 3rd, Harbison of the 15th, Lucas of the 26th, be entitled an act to amend Chapter 60, Title 36 the official code of Georgia annotated relating to general provisions relative to provisions applicable to counties and municipal corporations so as to provide for the establishment of a banking improvement zone to encourage opening of banks in areas underserved by banks.
The chair recognizes Chairman McCall to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For those of y'all that may be wondering why I'm doing a banking bill, I got that same question. But Senate Bill 20 now deals with agricultural language, which deals with fertilizer, soil amendments, and lime. And the first several sections gives the Department of Agriculture and the Commissioner the ability to rewrite some of the rules dealing with fertilizers, lime, and soil amendments, and also dealing with human waste and septage. If you look on section 7, all that does is move a date, an effective date that gives municipalities and private companies time to get their contracts in line before some of these fee increases take place. So the guts of the bill are the first several sections dealing with fertilizer, limes, and soil amendments. Mr. Speaker, if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them.
You have no questions?
Thank you, sir.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the substitute offered by the Committee on Rules? The chair hears none. The Rules Committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of Senate Bill 20 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the passage of Senate Bill 20. The ayes are 157, the nays are 4. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to Senate Bill 103.
Senate Bill 103 by Senator Davenport of the 44th, Henson of the 41st, Harpers of the 15th, Anderson of the 43rd, being entitled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 3, Title 6, the Official Code of Georgia, annotated, relating to powers of local governments as to air facilities, so as to provide that airports owned, controlled, or operated by a county, municipality, or other political subdivision of the state shall not assess any fee to a veteran for motor vehicle parking.
Chair recognizes Representative Al Williams to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me first say that we certainly want to thank Chairman Tanner and the Transportation Committee for their willingness to work with this bill. And this is a substitute. The House Committee on Transportation has offered this as a substitute to SB 103. And we want to also thank the chairman for appointing Representative Brian Prince and myself to work with perfecting this bill. And we want to thank the Rules Committee for bringing this bill up so late to make sure that I would be here. And this bill is a continuing effort to show our respect for and appreciation to veterans for their service to this country. This bill designates 2 parking spaces for veterans at commercial airports only. This bill does not interfere with any of the handicap parking, but it's more symbolic, just to show our respect for the veterans. These 2 designated spots will be on a first-come, first-served basis, and it will require that you have a veteran's license plate. Now, I've been asked why this bill did not specifically address some of the veterans of wars. Well, we wanted to be fair and just show the Pentagon in this country that we're still very supportive of veterans. And we wanted to make sure that some of our veterans, like my fellow Vietnam veteran, Bill Hitchens, already has a handicap sign, so he doesn't need this. This is strictly a priority parking bill. And I appreciate all that you've done for veterans in this House in assuring this country that Georgia supports its veterans. Mr. Speaker, I'll yield for any questions. I know there are many. It's a very complicated bill, and I know you want it explained some more.
You have questions if you care to yield.
I will yield. It's getting a little late. I only have 55 minutes to explain this bill.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I will yield.
Chair recognizes Representative McLeod to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
Gladly.
Where's the bill?
Well, the bill is right here.
I don't have it.
Well, you're certainly welcome to come up here and read it with me. It's right in your book if you'll turn. And there's several pages because this bill was so important it's given a prominent place in your book, but okay. You'll find it.
Okay.
Do you further yield?
I do.
Chair recognizes Representative Morris to your left for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
I will.
Is it not true that Georgia's 48th Brigade is still deployed in harm's way as we speak?
That is true.
Would this be a way to perhaps recognize them and those that have served like them?
Certainly it is.
Thank you for this bill.
Now, I would like to take more, but at this point I understand. So I'll yield the well with your kind permission, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the passage of Senate Bill 103. The ayes are 163, the nays are 3. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Chair recognizes Chairman Richard Smith for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just had to have Andy Welch one more time. I'm going to lose a good sweet mate. I move the House recede from its position on the Senate substitute of House Bill 99.
Chairman Smith has moved that the House recede from its position on House Bill 99. House Bill 99. Clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 99 by Representative Smith, the 134th, to be entitled an act to amend Title 33 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to insurance so as to provide for modernization and updates.
Chair recognizes Chairman Smith to explain his motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few minutes ago, we passed the Senate substitute for House Bill 99, and when it went back over to the Senate, they removed the housing tax credits for qualified low-income housing.
On the gentleman's motion that the House recede from its position on Senate Bill 99, all those in favor will vote aye, those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion that the House recede from its position, the ayes are 89, the nays are 69. This House has failed to recede. What purpose does Chairman Smith rise?
Make a motion.
State your motion.
Reconsideration.
Gentleman has moved that the House reconsider its action in failing to recede from its position on House Bill 99. All those in favor of reconsideration will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the gentleman's motion that this House reconsider its action, the ayes are 102, the nays are 59. This House has reconsidered its action in failing to recede. So we will vote it again. What purpose does Chairman Smith rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that the housing tax credits will be added to another bill, plus House Bill 540 is a standalone bill as it relates to this particular item?
If the gentleman so states, I know that is probably the truth. All right. We're back to the main question, and that is, will the House recede from its position on House Bill 99? All those in favor of receding will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 97, the nays are 60, and this House has receded on its position to House Bill 99. The chair recognizes Chairman Rhodes for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House adopt the Committee on Conference report for SB 72.
Chairman Rhodes has moved that the House adopt the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 72. The clerk will read the Conference Committee report.
The committees of conference on Senate Bill 72 recommend that both the Senate and the House of Representatives recede from their positions and that the attached committees of conference substitute to Senate Bill 72 be adopted. For the Senate, Harper the 7th, Heath the 31st, Mullis the 53rd. For the House, Rhodes the 120th, Kelly the 16th, and Burns the 159th.
Chair recognizes Chairman Rhodes to explain the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 72.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the same DNR package that we voted out a couple weeks ago. Just two minor changes. Is before you can hunt with air guns on private property in places that you had permission, and now they've made it where you can hunt with air guns anywhere, and it has a sunset of July the 1st of 2020, so we'll revisit that next year. And the shoal bass was taken out of this as the official state of Georgia riverine fish.
If you'd have told me that, I wouldn't have called it. On the adoption of the conference committee report on Senate Bill 72, all those in favor of the adoption of the conference committee report will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the adoption of the conference committee report. On Senate Bill 72, the ayes are 89, the nays are 72. This House has failed to adopt the conference committee report. What purpose does Chairman Rhodes rise?
Make a motion.
Going to put the shoal bass back in this time?
It was, I didn't have anything to do with it. It was a sin.
State your motion.
We need to reconsider, please.
Gentleman has moved that the House reconsider its action in failing to give a constitutional majority to the conference committee report on Senate Bill 72. All those in favor of reconsideration will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the gentleman's motion for reconsideration. The ayes are 97, the nays are 61. This House has reconsidered its action in failing to give a constitutional majority to Senate Bill, the conference committee report on Senate Bill 72. We will now vote it again. The main question is back before the body. What purpose does Chairman Knight rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it true that while I think many in the House may be disappointed with the removal by the Senate of the shoal bass part of the bill, which is very important to many of us in that area, I would still remind the body this is a bill that came out of game fish and parks and is important to many of the sportsmen and women of the state of Georgia, and I would remind members of that so that when we go home, we're conscious of everybody in the state and what this bill means. Isn't it true, Mr. Speaker?
Sure, the gentleman believes that to be true. What purpose does Chairman Rhodes rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that I've also had a conversation with Ms. Buckner, and we're going to work next year overtime to get the shoal bass through?
I'm sure the gentleman knows what he's talking about. What purpose does we're going to find out right now. What purpose does Representative Buckner rise?
Parliamentary
State
inquiry.
your inquiry.
Isn't it indeed true that the chairman did speak to me and tell me he was dedicated to making sure that the shoal bass swims next year?
I know the lady to be truthful and honorable, and I'm sure she is stating the truth.
And further parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that high school students proposed this proposal years ago when they were in high school, and now they are in college, and the shoal bass is being held back?
Maybe that's the problem. It's too complex for us. So what purpose does Representative Al Williams rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that I feel your tears all the way over here, Mr. Chairman, and you're very sorry that that fish is not in there. Is it not further true that you'll never make the mistake of messing with children and fish again in your life?
There is nothing the chair can say to that. All right, we're back to the main question. All those in favor of the adoption of the Committee of Conference report on Senate Bill 72 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the adoption of the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 72. The ayes are 105, the nays are 61, and the Committee of Conference report on Senate Bill 72 has been adopted. This House will come to order. Before I recognize the member for the next bill, I want to recognize in the gallery former State Representative Alan Peake. Chair recognizes Representative Gravely for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that the House adopt the Conference Committee report on House Bill 324.
Representative Gravely has moved that the House adopt the Committee of Conference report on House Bill 324. The clerk will read the caption.
Committee on Conference on House Bill 324 recommend that both the Senate and the House of Representatives recede from their positions and that the attached committees of conference substitute to HB 324 be adopted. For the Senate, Senator Mike Brass, Senator Brian Strickland. For the House of Representatives, Representative Micah Gravely, Representative Calvin Smyrie, Representative Mark Newton.
Chair recognizes Representative Gravely to present the Conference Committee report on House Bill 324.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members of this House. A couple of weeks ago, we voted on the House version of House Bill 324 over a margin of 120 to 40. We sent that bill to the Senate, and the Senate had some drastic changes. They had some pretty good ideas. And some of those ideas we thought were very appropriate to add into the bill. Before the bill went over there, we had also had a commitment in this House that we would address some concerns that members of this body had, both in the majority party and in the minority party. We also thought of some aspects while the bill was in the Senate that I think improved the bill. After a lot of deliberation in the committee, the Regulated Industries Committee over in the Senate, we realized that we needed to continue work on the bill and call it to conference committee. Let me tell you what happened in the House. When we sent House Bill 324 over to the Senate, we had 10 licenses, 10 private licenses that would have been issued by an oversight committee that had been assigned to the Department of Public Health. We also had 10 dispensaries, 10 dispensary license, private dispensary license. That would have put a total of the dispensaries, if you include the dispensaries that were attached to the licenses, and you include the dispensaries that would have been private issued, a total of 60 dispensaries across the state, and a total of 10 licenses. The Senate came back with a total of 2 university licenses and a potential opt-in from the state of Georgia to see about connecting with another state to import or export, preferably import the oil from other states. That would have allowed for the ability, the upstart ability of 18 months. It would have allowed oil to come into the state immediately. I didn't oppose the aspect of the universities being a part of this because we know that there are universities too that have a NIDA application recognition, that's the National Institute of Drug Abuse, where those universities have received an application to grow cannabis for research purposes. But we were concerned about the fact that the only university that has tried dispensing in 5 years has yet to produce the first bottle of oil. And that did not accomplish our goal of getting safe, lab-tested oil to the patients in this state. However, we thought that and we still believe that the university aspect of research was very appropriate, and we wanted to keep that. We also had an opportunity to include the pharmacies. There had been a lot of talk in this chamber about including pharmacies from a dispensing aspect. What happened in the conference committee was that we knew we had to be able to get the oil to market immediately, and we had to have professionals with expertise in this particular area with the ability to do it, while also retaining the university aspect of research, while also leaving open an opportunity for the state to import it. So what we've come up with in the conference committee report is the ability to have 6 private licenses. Instead of 10, we've got 2 large and 4 small private licenses. Now, these licenses are capped at the amount of square footage that they can grow cannabis. In our House version, the large licenses were unlimited. The small licenses had a cap of 40,000 or 20,000, and we've agreed that the 2 large licenses in the new conference committee report would be capped at 100,000 square feet, that the 4 small licenses would be capped at 50,000 square feet. Now, folks, I want you to listen to this. The amount of square footage that cannabis will be grown in this state is 9.5 acres total with private licenses. 9.5 acres in the entire state of Georgia. With a registry of right now of 8,400, we can potentially see this registry get up to about 15,000 to 16,000 in the next year. We believe that to start with, that is an adequate number for us. We're not going to start large. The lieutenant governor and the governor were able to weigh in. They supported this compromise. This compromise has just passed the Senate. So, ladies and gentlemen, 4 years ago, going on 5, we started down a journey in this House where we would allow patients in this state to possess an oil. You see, there was one aspect of that journey that we started on that we didn't think about, and that is, where would they get the oil? So for the last couple of years, our patients in this state have been traveling out of state. They've been breaking federal law. They've also been breaking the law of the states that they're having to travel to, because the medical aspect in those states prohibit members from other states coming in to purchase their oil. So I believe the compromise that we have reaches the goal of getting safe access for the citizens in this state. Now I want to tell you something. The language of my conferee, Dean Smyrie, was added. We have the disparity study that will do 2 years and then 4 years so that we can watch and monitor the participation rates. We also have the inclusion that a demonstration from each licensee will have to be demonstrated, and the board will have to have standards in place to gauge and measure those demonstrations of having minority participation. We also have we had an oversight committee that was going to be comprised of 12 people. We've lowered that to 7 people. 3 appointments from the governor, 2 appointments from the speaker, and 2 from the lieutenant governor. The dispensaries right now, the State Board of Pharmacy will create rules and regs so that local independent pharmacies across this state would be able to be the dispensaries. To start with, we want to go with the pharmacies first. If the commission sees that there is a need to issue a private dispensing license, they will work hand in hand with the State Board of Pharmacy to determine how that's going to look. Friends, I want to tell you, this is an opportunity for us to lead on this issue. And I also want to tell you this, there's been some talk about whether or not this is the beginning of recreational. And I want to say this, in states that have started a medicinal program and have moved within 2 to 3 years of going recreational, the vast majority started with the smoking aspect of medical. We have not done that, ladies and gentlemen. We stayed with an oil. From the very beginning, we were true to our course. We're now going on 5 years, and we have continued to stay true to our course. This bill simply allows patients in the state of Georgia who are registered legally with our state registry the opportunity to access a safe, lab-tested oil, which in committee, treating physicians from Emory, from Northside, from the Shepherd Center, from the Multiple Sclerosis Society, and independent physicians across this state came to endorse publicly this legislation. Mr. Speaker, that's a bit of the changes, some of the highlighted changes in the bill. I also wanted to recognize the fact that there was some concerns about the edibles. Would edibles be available? And if you'll look on line 176, we have actually defined the product, and product on line 176 means low THC oil delivered through an oil, a tincture, a transdermal patch, lotion, or capsule, except as prohibited by Code Section 1612-234, but not including any food product infused with low THC oil, included but not limited to cookies, candies, or edibles. The vaping prohibition is still in this bill. Mr. Speaker, that's pretty much the highlight. I would ask that this House favorably consider adopting this committee report so that we can move forward in getting our patients, many of whom are in this gallery, access to the oil that they need to treat their spouse, their child, or a loved one with a registered diagnosis.
Do you yield for some questions?
Yes, sir, I'll yield.
Chair recognizes the Dean of the House, Chairman Smyrie, to your left for a question.
Chairman Yield.
Yes, sir.
Yield. First of all, let me say I enjoyed working with you on the conference committee. A lot of give and take. But I hold in my hand some 2 pages of differences between the House and the Senate. Can you just give us the temperature and gauge how we work through this and come to this conclusion? And I just want to express to you thanks and how we came to grips with some of these issues, but some of them you have enumerated on, and I'm appreciative of it. And this was a pretty tall order, this list that we had to work through.
It was.
So I just wanted to say that publicly and to thank you for going through this and coming to agreement and for the give and take that we had between the House and the Senate and the conferees.
I appreciate that statement. I very much enjoyed working with you. I'm glad that we were able to continue on the commitment on some of your concerns. And I'm also proud to say that the 2 universities that will be designated with licenses, as far out as they want it, will be the University of Georgia and Fort Valley State University. So I was very happy to see that those 2 universities would be the 2 that are designated for these licenses. Mr. Speaker, I'll yield. I know the hour is late. I'll yield for one more question.
Chair recognizes Representative Newton to your right for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield?
I will.
I've
To my
appreciated from
co-sponsor.
the start your commitment all along the way that this was not going to be a slippery slope to recreational, but at the same time would meet the needs of Georgia families that so desperately seem to be helped by this medication. Isn't
Yes,
that
sir.
true?
That is correct.
Isn't it further true that there is a significant university component with Fort Valley State and with the University of Georgia, our two land-grant universities, being heavily involved, but also all our other universities are encouraged and allowed by this legislation to get serious about conducting research into finding out when and where this will be appropriate for patients?
Absolutely. I mean, these two universities are going to have the opportunity to work possibly with some private companies on the research component. I know that Emory has a research component right now that they're looking into. So I think it's an awesome opportunity for our state and our universities. For the longest time, there have been a lot of requests for research, and I think this component right here answers that question and allows us to move forward with documented data on how this substance works for our patients and how it's treating them.
Will the gentleman yield for one final?
I will, thank you.
One final thing is, I noticed you put in this bill a commitment. Isn't it true that there's a commitment that new diagnoses, rather than a slippery slope to too many new ones and coming too fast to this body trying to do science and medicine, that there is now, in addition to the Georgia Medical Board being a key part of reviewing new potential diagnoses, but also the Department of Public Health?
Absolutely. This legislature, I know that had been a concern for many, that will we just continue adding diagnosis? That has to come upon recommendation of the Department of Public Health and the Medical Composite Oversight. I think that's a great addition to this bill. It still allows for legislative input, but it also allows for those departments and agencies to bring forward suggestions based on medical treatment and based on what they feel like this substance will do for those diagnoses.
Thank you for advancing this true medical advance. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, I will, since he stood at the well, I know he's busy over here, but one of the chairmen had requested and was very serious about the fact that we didn't want to let the advertising of this get out of hand, and we were able to go with the Senate version that there would be physician to patient advertising, but that would be it. We knocked out the rest of the advertising. Also, I know another House member had requested that this industry would not receive a lot of the tax credits that were available to other industries, whether it be manufacturing or for employee, and I'd like to thank the gentleman for offering that. We were able to include that in this measure as well. So this is truly the tightest we could get this version. It has received the support of the Lieutenant Governor, the Governor, and Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you personally for the support you've given this measure as well. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. On the adoption of the Conference Committee report on House Bill 324, all those in favor of the adoption of the Conference Committee report will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? What purpose does Representative Morris rise?
Parliamentary procedure.
State your inquiry.
Request to be excused from this vote under
Gentleman
Rule
has
133.
Gentleman has that right, and the journal will so reflect. What purpose does Representative Cannon rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that this bill has to deal with non-drug related felonies as well?
I didn't hear that discussed. You need to get with the author is what my suggestion would be. What purpose does Representative Bennett rise?
Parliamentary
State
inquiry,
your
sir.
inquiry.
Is it not true that the author of this bill made certain assurances and promises and he has kept his word?
Well, that's good to hear. I didn't mean I was surprised, but have all members voted? Have all members now voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the adoption of the Conference Committee report on House Bill 324, the ayes are 147, the nays are 16. This Conference Committee report, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Got a few more people I want you to help me thank. Got a few minutes of work yet to do, but let's take care of this. We are blessed to have an outstanding clerk of the House and his staff. Please help me thank Bill Riley, the clerk of the House, the assistant clerk Crystal Roche, and all of the staff. Two people I can't do my job without are the House Messenger, Betsy Thoreau, and her deputy, Holly Pitcock. The page staff, Debbie Bryant, Dale Burns, Helen Kelly, Marcia Jaspers, and Gloria Ambrose. The house photographers, Anna Marie Watkins and Holly Van Lincoln. Chamber technologist Justin Speck. And probably the most important people are the fiscal office. They sign our paychecks. Director Jennifer Williams and the fiscal office staff and the maintenance staff. All of the House administrative assistants and staff. The temporary session staff. And although I don't get to go in there much anymore, the anteroom staff, Angela Holland and her team. We've got the greatest doorkeepers in the world. Let's give them a shout out. Pat Hanote and all of the house doorkeepers. And saving my best for last, the Speaker's office staff, Leisha Johnson, Michelle Spearman, Holly Pitcock, Kim Aiken, Allie Martin, Spiro Amburn. I thought I heard a boo or two. Caleb McMicken, Keith Williams, Sergeant Vince Mooney, Trooper Darrell Benton, and intern Mark Glass. I love all of y'all. Now it's back to work a little bit. Whoa, wait a minute. Wait. Chair recognizes Representative Beasley Teague.
Mr. Speaker, it's time to go home now. It's just time. Everybody that's been around my desk, and we all agree, right? It's time to go home.
We're about to go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Chairman Alan Powell for a motion.
Thank goodness, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to ask this House to agree to the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 214.
Chairman Powell has moved that this House adopt the Committee of Conference report on House Bill 214. Clerk will read the caption.
The Committee on Conference on Senate Bill 214 recommend that both the Senate and the House of Representatives recede from their positions. The attached committees of conference substitute to SB 214 be adopted. For the Senate, Martin of the 9th, Watson the 1st, Ginn of the 47th. For the House, Powell of the 32nd, Lott of the 122nd, and Jaspers of the 11th.
I've been told to be quick, ladies and gentlemen, and I will. Bring to you Senate Bill 214. It left this House after we cleaned up the cosmetology language. It comes back still cleaned up, but on Section 1, something that passed the House and the Senate that says all licensing boards, that they can't revoke a license for somebody that's delinquent on the student loans. Second part is a micro blading bill that you heard earlier. This is for the cancer patients and those hairless cats that I talked about before. Section 3 simply said took out the good moral character since that's not enforceable. It also said that the licensing board could also administer the test for the apprenticeship in the first 12 months for the theory examination. And last but not least, Section 4, the electrical contractors can do the C&E out of state at their conventions, and they can't advertise unless they are an electrical engineer. Be glad to answer any questions, but certainly would appreciate your support for this bill.
Gentleman has yielded the will. On the adoption of the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 214, all those in favor of the adoption will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the adoption of the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 214. The ayes are 151, the nays are 7. The Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 214 has been adopted. Chair recognizes Representative Carson for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move this House agree to the Senate substitute on House Bill 365 as amended by the House.
Chairman Carson has moved that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 365 as amended by the House. All those in, or the clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 365 to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 5C of Title 48 of the Fiscal Code of Georgia Annotated relating to alternative ad valorem taxes on motor vehicles.
Chair recognizes Representative Carson to explain the Senate substitute and the amendment.
Folks, this House Bill 365 had a different use earlier, but this bill now all it does is it simply strips out other language and extends the sunset date on the Cobb Special Transit District that we passed in 9/30. That the sunset was December 1st of 2019. Now it's 2021. Ask for your favorable consideration.
Gentleman has yielded the will. Is there any objection to the adoption of the House amendment? The chair hears none, and the House amendment is adopted. On the gentleman's motion that this House agree to the Senate substitute, House Bill 365, as amended by the House, all those in favor of the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 147, the nays are 10, and this House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 365 as amended by the House. Chair recognizes Chairman F. Strachan for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 543.
Chairman F. Strachan has moved that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 543. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 543 to be titled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 7 of Title 19 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to general provisions regarding parent and child relationship generally.
Chair recognizes Chairman F. Strachan to explain his motion.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, we're going to sine die on a positive note here. The equitable caregiver bill that will allow judges to provide custody to loving individuals who can serve in a parental role for children is a great bill that we perfected in the Senate. It's back before you. Would ask for your favorable consideration. I'll yield the well.
On the gentleman's motion that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 543, all those in favor will vote aye, those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machine. Chair recognizes the majority leader, not the motion, but a motion.
Mr. Speaker.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. The clerk will lock the machines on House Bill 543. The ayes are 152, the nays are 3. This House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 543. Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I do have a motion. Mr. Speaker, I move that all bills and resolutions on the general calendar be recommitted to the committee from whence they came.
Majority Leader has moved that all the bills on the calendar be recommitted to the committee from whence they came. Is there objection? Chair hears none, and it is so ordered. What purpose does Representative Mathiak rise?
I rise to make a motion
State your motion.
to move House Bill 717 from regulated industries to Health and Human Services. Both, did I say that backwards? Both chairmen have agreed.
Clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 717 by Representative Mathiak, the 73rd, and others to be titled an act to amend Title 31 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to health, so as to repeal in its entirety Chapter 26 relating to practices of midwifery.
On the lady's motion that House Bill 717 be withdrawn from the Regulated Industries Committee and committed to the Health and Human Services Committee. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and it is so ordered. All right, listen up. We have had some outstanding young people that have been here all day long. And let's give a big round of applause for the pages that are still here with us. Thank y'all very, very much. Okay, now go back with Holly. Okay. The chair recognizes the majority leader of the House for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this House now adjourn sine die.
The majority leader has moved that this House adjourn sine die. All those in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. This House is adjourned sine die.